We start this evening, ladies and gentlemen, with a breaking news report from CNN. From CNN about an hour and a half ago. Hundreds likely dead in Gaza hospital blast as Israeli blockade cripples medical response. By Jesse Young, Tara John, Sananor Haq, and Jahid Mahmoud. CNN, Palestinian officials say hundreds were killed by a massive blast at a Gaza hospital on Tuesday as humanitarian concerns mount over Israel's deprivation of food, fuel, and electricity to the enclave's population. Al-Hali Baptist Hospital was sheltering thousands of displaced people when it was bombed Tuesday, the Palestinian Health Ministry said in a statement. Many victims are still under the rubble, it added. First two paragraphs. Third paragraph. Palestinian officials blamed ongoing Israeli strikes for the lethal incident, but the Israeli Defense Forces have categorically denied any involvement in the hospital attack, blaming instead a failed rocket launch by the Palestinian Islamic Jihad group, a rival Islamist group in Gaza. Gaza has been under siege by Israel for more than a week in response to the deadly incursion by Hamas, the Islamist militant group that controls the coastal enclave, home to 2.2 million people. Hospitals, meanwhile, are struggling to tend to the wounded across the territory, operating with shortages of electricity and water. Vital humanitarian aid is, meanwhile, piling up at Gaza's shuttered border, despite diplomatic efforts to open a corridor from Egypt. The UN and other officials have said they need assurance of safe passage for potential aid convoys. And it goes on. 99% of that is a lie. 99% of that is a lie. And the corporation that owns CNN should be ashamed of what it's putting out there, particularly at a time of war that could involve the United States supporting the enemy. CNN supports the enemy. The New York Times supports the enemy. The vast majority of the media in America and Europe support the enemy. The enemy of America, the enemy of the West, the enemy of Israel. Now, let me just say this to you. Now we know what moves the media. An allegation from Hamas that Israel blew up a hospital in Gaza. Despite the fact that Israel does not target hospitals and is well aware of the outcry if it did target a hospital. In fact, there's now video showing that the Palestinian Islamic Jihad fired off a wave of missiles toward Israel. At the same time, apparently one of them hit the hospital. But the media are poised. They're poised to attack Israel. And this Islamic Jihad works side by side with Hamas. They're the ones who fired a barrage of missiles at Israel. One of them fell short, hitting the hospital. There's a video out now. And they have the data to back it up. In fact, about 30% of the missiles Palestinian terrorists fired at Israel misfire, causing damage and death in Gaza. I'll bet CNN didn't report that. I understand the media are disappointed. I understand that. And I understand that now there's pressure on Israel to make sure that the terrorists, the Nazis, aren't shooting errant missiles. Somehow that's now Israel's responsibility. We're told this couldn't have happened at a worse time for Israel. So now Israel's responsible for an Islamic Jihad missile that hits a hospital in Gaza. I understand Iran, the Palestinian Authority, the Arab countries don't care about the facts. They have dictators in every damn one of these countries. There's not a democracy in the Arab world, not one. They're dictators. They're monarchs. They're terrorists, they're dictators, whatever they are, they are. But the fact that the media regurgitate these lies from terrorists and are poised to condemn Israel at virtually every turn is unconscionable. Will anybody at CNN resign over what CNN is doing? Now, we know who committed the atrocity against the Jews on October 7th, including babies in their cribs, people burned alive, people decapitated. In one case, one of the forensic medical doctors said, listen to this one, Mr. Producer. They took little kids, grouped them into what I'll call a pile, and set them all on fire at once. There was a burning pile of children. One of these forensic medical doctors was very active after 9/11, going into the rubble to try and find bodies and so forth. And he was driven to tears. He was interviewed. He said, I've never seen anything like this. I can't even imagine anything like this. He described one pregnant woman who had her belly sliced open. Her baby was slashed to death. The umbilical cord was still attached, and they shot her in the back of the head. I guess for the media, that has to happen in a hospital to make it matter. So we know who committed these atrocities. They even took video of the atrocities. They were so proud of themselves. We know who slaughtered 30 Americans and have a dozen or two American hostages. We know who started it all and always does, whose mission statement calls for the eradication of the Jews and all non-believers. So when you get a report like this, and Hamas is saying Israel did it, and we lost 500 people, in order to get the Arab street all fired up, and these dictators and terrorists and monarchs who run these countries throw in immediately because they don't want to be overthrown, who do you believe? You're in a newsroom, and the story comes in, and Hamas is immediately saying it's Israel. You go with a story like that? Most of our media do. Most of our media go with it. And then in a sickening example of professional malpractice, they'll kind of step back when the facts come out, and then they'll move on. Here's Netanyahu at a press conference just a little bit ago. Cut one, go.
Hamas are the new Nazis. Hamas is ISIS, in some instances worse than ISIS. And just as the world united to defeat the Nazis, just as the world united to defeat ISIS, the world has to stand united behind Israel to defeat Hamas. This is part of an axis of evil of Iran and Hezbollah and Hamas. Their open goal, is to eradicate the state of Israel. The open goal of Hamas is to kill as many Jews as they could, and the only difference is they would have killed every last one of us, murdered every last one of us, if they could. They just don't have the capacity, but they murdered an extraordinary 1,300 civilians, which in American terms is like many, many, many 9/11s. So obviously we must take action to defeat Hamas and to ensure that this doesn't happen again. But this is not only our battle, it is our common battle, the battle of civilization against barbarism. And if it's not stopped here, this savagery will reach you very soon and reach the entire world.
Already has. Democracies in Europe have been overrun with immigrants from the Middle East. Our own country, same thing. You see the protesters in the streets. Obviously, they're not all from the Middle East, but many are, and they're funded by Hamas-related organizations. I've been through this in great detail. It's inarguable. It's unequivocal. And they're here on at least 300 college campuses. And they're here in our media, like at MSNBC, CNN, New York Times, Washington Post. They are here. The Democrat Party on Capitol Hill. Tlaib, Omar, AOC, and the rest of the scum on the Democrat Party left. Don't hit a hospital. You can hit a kibbutz, by the way. You can hit a synagogue. You can murder people in their beds. You can kill Holocaust survivors. You can kill babies in 1,000 different ways. You can rape. You can pillory. You can slaughter 265 teenagers at a music event for peace. Have at it. Just don't hit the hospital. And they didn't hit the hospital. The people who slaughtered Jews on October 7th, who wanted to kill more Jews because they're shooting missiles from schools and hospitals and mosques and other places where the Biden administration says you cannot attack. In a more northern part of the Gaza Strip, Islamic Jihad of Palestine fired a barrage of missiles, and at least one, and they think maybe more than one, fell short and hit the hospital. And there's now video of this. And yet CNN writes the crap that CNN writes. And what about the humanitarian concerns? It's amazing to me, the humanitarian concerns. First of all, context, history. Our own war, World War II. We had no concerns about humanitarian efforts at all when we went to war against the Japanese, the Germans, and the Italians. None. Zero. In fact, we were targeting hospitals, schools, anything we could to break the spirit of the Nazis, of Imperial Japan, and fascist Italy. Citizens were targeted all through World War II. But Israel doesn't target citizens. But you can't fight a war without citizens dying. And if I have to explain night after night, day after day, time after time, the difference between targeting citizens and citizens who die as a result of war launched by their own regime, and if I have to explain again and again and again the unconscionable effort at creating moral equivalency, then these people have no morality. They don't know the difference between good and evil. I'm talking about the American and European media. What does it take? What do they need to see? What do they need to hear? What do they need to read? The answer is, it doesn't matter. The American media are our enemy. We don't have a free press. We have propagandists and demagogues. That's what we have, who are free under our First Amendment to be propagandists and demagogues. We don't have freedom of speech and academic freedom on our Democrat-controlled and funded college campuses with your tax dollars. We have indoctrination, brainwashing, the creation of a generation of American-hating Americans and terror-loving Americans as long as the target is the United States and Israel.